Hello and welcome to 3D modeling video number 45. In this video I want to give you guys a comprehensive look at various modifiers, mostly the important ones. There are a few I will avoid because they're not really relevant to us, but I'll try to give you a walkthrough of pretty much all the modifiers that you will need to use to enhance your modeling and everything else. So let's go ahead and begin. I'll go ahead and avoid the world space modifiers for now. We will cover them later. The first one under object space is effect region. This is kind of a strange modifier. Keep in mind that a lot of the modifiers are a little bit old, a little bit outdated, so there are better ways to do various things than using these modifiers. The effect region, you have an arrow here in the middle, and when you move it out, the arrow affects the vertices that are near it. And that's pretty much it. I'm sure you can find some use for these, but I haven't found any. There are, of course, better ways of getting the object into the form like that. Next we have the attribute holder, and you'll notice that there's no parameters, it's completely empty. That's because the attribute holder is used for animation. Once you begin setting up your animation, and you have various animations that you can insert here to easily control them. For example, if you have several modifiers that you use for animation, you can put information, parameters from those modifiers into the attribute holder, which means the attribute holder can have parameters from several different modifiers that you can quickly just put under one modifier, the top one. So if I had, a skin modifier, a skin wrap modifier, I could insert the parameters from these into the attribute holder, which gives me a quick way to access all the modifiers below. But this is mostly for animation, and once I start covering animation, we'll get into that. Next we have the bend modifier, and to demonstrate this I'll go ahead and use a cylinder. I'll go ahead and increase the height and increase the height segments. So bend modifier is a nice one. You have the bend, you have the angle, and the direction. So you can have it bend at a certain angle and going in a certain direction, and you have three bend axes, X, Y, and Z. Keep in mind that not all of them will look good. For example, X will give me this because it's trying to bend in the X axis, Y-axis, and Z-axis. So if you want a good 90-degree bend, just set the angle to 90, and there you go. So keep in mind that you can limit the modifiers by using a selection. So edit poly, let's say I only want the top to be bent, so let me go ahead and give it a little bit more segments here for a nicer bend. Let's say I only want the top to be bent. I'll go ahead and make a selection. To make things easier, you can use another viewport to make the selection easier, so you don't have to worry about the perspective and not getting the ones you want, like right here. And now I will immediately go and select the bend modifier with the selection still being made here. And now only the selected selection will be affected, and this can work with vertices, edges, polygons, anything. Now the problem here is that it's the gizmo. Every modifier has its own gizmo, its own tool that you use to control its effect. And if you expand it, you'll see we have two. We have gizmo and center. And modifying both of these sub-objects will allow us to fix this. I can either move the center or I can move the gizmo. And of course you can go ahead into your snaps, activate your vertex snap, and so you can just snap the gizmo to a vertex like this, which will make it easier than having to move it down. You can also select this vertex, copy its Z position, make the selection again, and now paste that into the center. So we have now limited the effect of the modifier to only the selection. And you can also make things even fancier by adding soft selection to the mix, which will gradually apply the effect. For a more gradual, softer bend. The bend modifier is also useful for turning planar objects into cylinders. So I'll give you an example of that and how this can greatly enhance your workflow, especially when you're working on environments. I find this especially helpful when working on environments. Okay, so here is my quick object. I started with a plane and I made this. So now I want to turn this into a cylindrical object. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and activate my snaps toggle. I'm going to go ahead and snap, hold shift and go from here to there to have a perfectly tiled object. I'll give it, let's say, 5 copies. Right, then I'll go ahead and attach it all together, and I'll go ahead and select all the vertices, Control A, and weld. And sometimes after this step you can reset the X form. If you find yourself getting some strange results, you can reset the X form. You can also adjust the pivot, center it. Alright, so now when I apply the bend modifier, I will select the x-axis and I will make the angle 360 for a full circle. And as you can see, it has gone and done so, except I want it to be in a different direction. So let me go ahead and try to change this to 90, and there you go. It's now done in this direction. And let me give you another example. I can also set it to, let's see, negative 90 or 270. So let me go ahead and try 270, and it's giving me the same results. So this is how I went ahead and turned this object into these two objects. So it's very handy for that sort of thing. The bend modifier is a great one, so make sure you set it to a shortcut and make sure you use it often. Make sure that you learn how it works. Let's see what we have next. Next we have the camera map modifier. Okay, so this is the a default sphere. I haven't done anything to it. I'm going to go ahead and apply a texture that I made, a material that I made previously. I'll go ahead and show standard map and viewport. So okay, so this is not the one I want. Let me go ahead and change it real quick. Okay, and let me go ahead and increase the tiling. Okay. So these are the default UV coordinates, mapping coordinates for the sphere. That's what it looks like. As you can see, it's all right on the sides, but at the top there's problems. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and press Control C to create a camera. I'm going to go ahead and press P to return to perspective view, and you can see the camera has been created in the same position that I was in the viewport. Now I'm going to go ahead and apply a camera map modifier. Camera mapping, current camera object none, pick camera, and make sure you set the map channel. pick camera and I'll click on this camera right here, and you can see what's happening is that the camera is projecting the texture. There's a new UV map created based on the camera's angle. So the camera is up here, it's looking straight down, and as you can see the texture has been projected pretty much right on there, but the problem is that it has messed up the coordinates for the side and the top. Now I found a good tutorial online for how you can use the camera map to quickly UV and texture your object, and I think I might share that with you later. But for now, this is the camera map modifier. It's got some uses, but a lot of these modifiers are highly specialized, so chances are you might go a long time without ever needing to use them. And in many cases you might forget that they're there. So this video and the following videos will kind of serve as a good example. If you haven't used a modifier in a while and you want to kind of remember what it does, these videos will get you up to speed. Okay, next we have cap holes. So I'm going to go ahead and apply Edit Poly, and I'm going to go ahead and delete a few polygons. I'm going to go ahead and press delete on the keyboard, and now I will go ahead and apply the cap holes modifier, and as you can see it has capped all the holes. This has the same effect as simply going into your Edit Poly and going into your border mode, selecting the borders and going to cap. And I think the default shortcut for that is Alt-P. So the modifier does the same thing as this, except it does it much faster. If you want to quickly cap the holes but not do it manually, you can use the cap holes modifier. Simple. Next we have the cloth modifier. This modifier allows us to turn our objects into cloth quickly and easily. And I'll go ahead and give you a quick demonstration. Creating cloth in 3ds Max is very easy. I'll make this my cloth object. I want to give it some more segments. So what I'll do is it's as simple as going to cloth, applying the cloth modifier, and maybe changing some things around. I'm going to go into self collision. I'm going to go into object properties. So this plane 02 is my cloth object. I have a bunch of presets like burlap, cashmere, cotton, rubber, satin, heavy leather, wool. I'll use cotton. I'm going to go ahead under add objects, and I'm going to add the other plane, and that's going to be my collision object. So plane 02, this one right here, is the cloth, and plane 01 is what will collide with the cloth. Okay, and now I simply go under simulate, and there's the cloth being simulated, and it's going all the way to 100 frames because that's what the current time frame is. If you have 1,000 or 10,000 frames here, it will go all the way there. So the more complex your object is, the more time it will take. If you want good results, you'll have to, increase your complexity. Maybe wait a little bit until it finishes its simulation, and then after this you can apply a shell modifier to give your cloth some thickness and a turbo smooth to smooth it out, and you can get some very nice results. This is a very simple, quick demonstration. You can use cloth on characters, you can use it in the background, you can use it to simulate hair and leaves and all sorts of things. The cloth modifier is very flexible. So it deserves its own video, so later on expect a cloth video. Let's see. Next we have delete mesh, which, just as the name says, it deletes the mesh. Now the object is still technically here. If I deselect it and make a selection, you can see it selects something. Plane 01. So delete mesh, it deletes the actual geometry, but it does not delete the object. So what's the purpose of this? Well, if you want an object to disappear, you're making a movie, a cinematic or something, and you want a character, an object to disappear, but you still want it to be workable, you can use the delete mesh modifier, because you can animate modifiers, which means at a certain point in your scene, you can go ahead and activate this modifier and it will make this mesh invisible. It will delete it. And of course there are other uses. So it's a pretty simple modifier. Next we have delete patch, which does the same thing except it works with patches. So what are patches? Patches are a different way of modeling. I've shown you guys how to work with polygons, but if you right click, we also have meshes, which are very similar to polygons. We have patches, and we have NURBS, which stands for non-uniform rational B-splines. But those are just different types of geometry. So delete patch will delete a patch object. Displacement approximation will, this is kind of a complex one. It will approximate your displacement, but it's kind of a very quirky modifier. I haven't really found much use for it. Next we have displace, a very interesting modifier. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go ahead and apply a turbo smooth and give it like, say, 6 iterations, which will make the object about 200,000 polygons roughly. So it's going to make it quite dense. And of course, how dense you go depends on your machine and how much time you're willing to wait. So what I'm going to do, so displace. So what are displacement maps? What's displacement? Displacement is using a texture to push your geometry outwards. So remember, the normals are invisible arrows pointing outwards from all the vertices, and so objects, the program will utilize a texture map, and everywhere that it's white it will push the geometry outwards, and everywhere that it's black it will not push it, and everywhere that it's gray it will push a certain amount depending on how much white there is. And let me go ahead and give you an example. I'll go ahead back here, and remember this concrete texture. I'm going to go ahead and change it to something like this. This is something I just quickly made in Photoshop. It's not the highest quality, but it will work for this presentation. And I'm going to go ahead and decrease the tiling to 1, 1. I'm going to go ahead and apply it, and so this is, for our purposes, a displacement map. It has black parts and it has white parts. So everywhere that it's white, it will expand, go in the direction of normals, move out, and everywhere that it's black, it will stay the same. So displacement can be a very expensive technique, so I don't recommend that you have all your objects with displacement, but it will also give you very nice results, especially if you want something to look extra nice, and if you want it to be zoomed in very close, displacement will give you that ability. However, the displace modifier isn't really the same. Usually when you're working on displacement, you will put a displacement map right here in a displacement slot. However, that will render, and that will occur during the render time when it's rendering. However, if you want to see what displacement looks like in your viewport in real time, you can use the displace modifier. We have our strength and decay. The strength is how much the geometry will push down in centimeters, or whatever system units you're using, and decay will change, will dampen the effect. It will reduce the effect. So you can, what you usually do is you open up one of your materials, any material, and what you do is you drag the map from here into your map slot here and make it an instance, which means that whenever I change this, it will automatically change right here. So if I change the tiling settings, it will change it right here as well. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and make the map actually not visible, because we just want to see the geometry, not the texture. So as I also want to check to use existing mapping. If you don't check this, this modifier will apply its own UV mapping, which will probably not be what you want. In this case, we have a simple plane, so it does not make much of a difference. However, if you had something complex like a character or creature, this would completely mess that up, and you want to check use existing mapping. So now, as I increase the strength, you will see the geometry start to pop out. There you go. And it's looking very rough here, but remember, it depends on how dense your mesh is. And this can heavily slow down your scene. So remember, with Turbo Smooth Modifier, we have our iterations and we have our render iterations. And these are the iterations that it will apply once it's actually rendering. So what you can do to speed up your viewport is to right click on iterations, make this 0, and make your render iterations a high number, let's say 8. So now it will be very simple in the viewport, just 50 polygons, but once it renders, it will be 8. So let's see what this looks like when it's rendered. And the default shortcut for rendering is Shift Q. It might take some time. It also depends on... This could use up a lot of memory. So this is a good idea. This is why you should have a lot of RAM in your computer. And this is what it looks like when it's rendered. The Turbo Smooth Modifier applies 8 iterations of Turbo Smooth, and then the Displace Modifier does its job. So you can see it looks alright. However, I should really decrease the displacement strength to something more subtle, like say 0.3 for example, and that might give you better results. So this is one way of making displacement without using the actual displacement slot in the material. So that's the effect that it gives me. Of course, if I wanted to make it look nicer, I would spend more time with this, make the displacement map nicer, do a little bit of sculpting, as always, to give it that custom touch. But that is the displacement modifier. Thank you for watching and take care.